On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, the dynamic duo rides again, just in time for the NBA to go completely to hell. Damian Lillard is not going to Miami. He's going somewhere far more north, far more cold, with a slightly better superstar sidekick, is probably fair to say. Damian Lillard, Giannis Antetokounmpo, they are the newest power couple in the NBA. We're going to talk about that and how it impacts the Memphis Grizzlies on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a twofer Thursday because you've got both Damichael and Joe Mullinax joining you on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much. However you're taking in the show, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. I'm just happy to have my good buddy Damichael back by my side. Obviously, Damichael was back on yesterday's episode, but Damichael, because I'm still in the throes of my football season as a high school coach and teacher. So I figured maybe we'd give him a break from two single episodes in a row and that sort of thing. So Damichael covered the Desmond Bane All-Star 2024 conversation, which looks a heck of a lot more likely today than it did yesterday. Partner, it's good to see you again. I hope you had a good trip with safe travels and you're excited to get back into Locked On Grizzlies, your team each and every day, once again, with your boy, Joe Mullinax here.
I'm excited. And you just touched on it. I was thinking the same thing when Damian Lillard getting shifted from the Western Conference. In the second segment yesterday, I touched on it. I said, the one thing that's really working hard against Desmond Bane, and I think one of the commenters pointed it out as well with Mike Conley in the past, just the Western Conference guard being so loaded. There were 11 guys I pointed out. Now it's 10 fighting for 7 spots. That helps his chances. But I'm happy to be back with you, Joe. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about today.
A lot to talk about today here on Locked On Grizzlies, your team each and every day, proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, like us on YouTube, comment, review, subscribe, all those fun things wherever you get your podcasts. We are excited to be with you. Of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He's the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media. Been covering the Grizzlies for a long time, dating back to my Grizzly Bear Blues days at SB Nation. Also do contributing during the season over at SB Nation. So between Damichael and I, if this is your first time around, you're in a good place when it comes to Memphis Grizzlies content. But we are going to start with the 30,000-foot view, the macro scope of the NBA, Damichael, because everybody's talking about it, right? The Damian Lillard blockbuster deal finally goes down, but he's not going to Miami. He is going to the Milwaukee Bucks as part of a 3-team trade. Deandre Ayton is now in Portland. So is Jrue Holiday, at least for now. The Phoenix Suns get Yusuf Nurkic from the Portland Trailblazers. They get other pieces. I think maybe a Grayson Allen, if I'm not wrong.
Grayson Allen to the Suns.
Friend, heading to the Suns. Nasir Little, who I've talked about, I know you have in the past as well. He would have been a fun piece in Memphis. Now he's going to Phoenix. So lots of moving pieces here, but obviously the superstar name is Damian Lillard. The NBA world, I think X shut down for a little bit. I wasn't able to tweet or or post, whatever it was called. It was pretty hot take filled, maybe not quite as hot as my take, which I'll share here in a moment. But Damichael, what were you thinking when you saw the news that Damian Lillard is indeed Eastern Conference bound, but he's with Giannis in Milwaukee now?
Well, the first thing I thought is when I saw your tweet, I said, well, this is right on brand for Joe Mullinax. So you know what? There's no such thing as a hotter take than a Joe Mullinax take. And I love that about you. I really do. But when I saw this trade, the first thing that went through my mind was how in the world do you stop Giannis Antetokounmpo, Damian Lillard pick and roll? Like this is arguably the best paint scorer and the best floor stretcher from the standpoint of Damian Lillard shoots more those 33, 34, 35-foot three-pointers, those long-range three-pointers. He shoots more of those than Steph Curry. Steph Curry is the most accurate, best three-point shooter of all time. But you talk about a guy who's going to stretch the floor from feet well beyond the three-point line and a guy who puts more pressure on the paint than anybody in the NBA, it's a problem. Chris Middleton is no slouch as a shooter. Like, he was big in that series when they won the championship against the Suns. So I think it's a big move for them. Of course, it also went through my mind that, man, Jrue Holiday is a big loss. Like, a lot of the players in the NBA at the guard position will tell you that Jrue Holiday is the toughest guy, in terms of for them to score on. So I know there are a lot of guards in the league who probably like, ooh, okay. I can get to my spots a little bit easier against Milwaukee. And there's some of that too. But, Milwaukee, the firepower that they have now, I remember Jrue Holiday, kind of just like some of the Grizzlies players, John Morant, Desmond Bane, is not a really good isolation scorer to this point. But in Milwaukee, he was being put in situations to a lot of high isolation situations. Damian Lillard, one of the best isolation scorers in the NBA. Now that you have him to close games, and you could just, when Giannis gets a mismatch, you can go to him. But you can close games with Dame time. That's freaky. As some people have said, Joe, I saw this trending on X. It's freak time.
It's freak time. I like that. I think all three teams got worse. That was my general takeaway from the trade. That's a hot take when it comes to Milwaukee, because everything you just said is pretty fair. Again, a Giannis Lillard pick and roll, that's going to be difficult to stop. And I do think you have Brook Lopez still there, right? You talked about Middleton still being there, lots of room to operate for all of those guys. But beyond that foursome, what are we talking about now, right? Like, who is there to really make an impact as a defensive player on the wing? Who is there to provide depth? Heaven forbid something happens to one of these guys. Brook Lopez has had history concerns. Chris Middleton has had injury issues. I'm not sold on the Bucks being some unstoppable force now because of this trade. I think it was the right trade. And I made the point on X talking about, if the Grizzlies traded Desmond Bane and 2 first-round picks, whatever the first-round picks were exactly, for Donovan Mitchell, how would Grizzlies fans feel? And I think it was Tricity. I want to give her credit. I've known her since I started covering the Grizzlies back in 2011. Yeah. She made a very good, fair point. Milwaukee and Memphis are in different places. Milwaukee has to continue to do stuff to make sure that Giannis sees that they're trying to do stuff, right? Like, if they had just sat on their laurels and they lost again, the rumors of Giannis leaving in free agency would have just continued to grow. If they lose now after this trade, which pretty obviously is the best Milwaukee could have done, right, in terms of bringing in a co-star to go around alongside Giannis, if they lose now, who's he going to blame? I don't think you can blame Milwaukee. I don't think you can blame the coach that you helped hire. Like, at some point, you have to be the best player on the planet that you are supposed to physically be. Nikola Jokic obviously might disagree to an extent, but in terms of physical ability, it's Giannis. It's time to be that dude again and go on a run, because the franchise is doing everything in their power to give you the tools you need to win. At some point, you got to go win. Like, the Bucks ownership and front office doesn't play the game. The coaching staff isn't out there running the pick and roll for you. It's going to be you and Dame time, and it's time to execute, because, again, I think Milwaukee, while I still have doubts because I'm a big Jrue Holiday guy, I think that this is the best they could have done to try to appease Giannis and show, hey, we're trying to get you help for a championship run.
Yeah, and it's a fit. A fit is important, right. and I want to point that out, because you used the Donovan Mitchell, Desmond Bane example, which makes sense from the player ranking standpoint. I
trade value perspective.
Exactly. I seen exactly where you were going with that. You're talking about a player who's ranked around 40th best player, a player that's in the top 10, top 15 range. Like, I get that. But the difference here is you're talking about one of the best paint scorers, one of the best three-point shooters, whereas Donovan Mitchell, the Grizzlies with Desmond Bane, like, he is that three-point shooter that the Grizzlies need, because John Morant isn't a really good three-point shooter. Marcus Smart isn't a really good three-point shooter. Jaren Jackson Jr. is good for his position, but overall, he isn't a great three-point shooter by any means. they need Desmond Bane as that type of player. Whereas in this situation in Milwaukee, they got other shooters. But now putting Dame on the floor to have that guy who can close games, Chris Middleton is very capable. When you take this injury riddle last season aside, he's very capable of closing games in the past. They got weapons, they got options, and I think it's a team to fear. Now, I think in certain matchups, you think of a team, like the Clippers, like the Suns, even think of a team like the Grizzlies. Teams that have multiple dynamic scoring guards can really probably go at them now, because in the past, Jrue Holiday has this guy, Chris Middleton has this guy. Jail. Simple. Now, you got to kind of hide Dame. We'll see what they do with their other guys and whatnot, but it's definitely going to be a little bit of a different position outlook for the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll see how that works out. But overall, I think it's a plus trade for them. The Suns, I think, is pretty neutral from their standpoint. And for Portland, the big question is, which I think we'll talk about in the next segment, is this Jrue Holiday thing.
Right. And what it all means for the Memphis Grizzlies. Because, of course,
it ties in.
Locked On Grizzlies. It definitely ties in. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by DoorDash. Are you missing the syrup for your pancakes, or have you just run out of your favorite coffee creamer? That's happened to me a time or two, Damichael. With DoorDash grocery delivery, you get what you want right when you need it. You can get fresh groceries for the week, even if you don't have time to go to the store. Grocery delivery with DoorDash is the way to go. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver restaurant favorites. Now you can get grocery delivery that actually delivers too. And if you want even more value, you can save on all of your grocery and restaurant favorites with a $0 delivery fee on all eligible orders with a Dash Pass membership. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA at checkout. Limited time offer, terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, $0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget, that's the code LOCKEDONNBA for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. When we come back, we're talking what all this means for the Grizzlies. Next, stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole, for the first time in a long time of the Commercial Appeal. You're going to see the two of us together a lot more moving forward. We got Media Day coming up, Grizzlies mini camp and training camp and preseason basketball. It's time to get back into the swing of things, and we will be back with you just about every day here on Locked On Grizzlies to get you ready for the Memphis Grizzlies season. The NBA news of the day was Damian Lillard, right? He's now on the Milwaukee Bucks. We talked about that earlier in the show. But this is Locked On Grizzlies, and we need to take it from a Grizzlies perspective. So how does this impact Memphis? We talked about Desmond Bane now having a little bit of an easier path through the All-Star game with another guard out of the Western Conference. But you brought up before we went to break, Damichael, Jrue Holiday is now in the Western Conference, a multi-time All-Star, right? Jrue Holiday has the ability to make an All-Star game. How long is he going to be in Portland? Is there another shoe to drop? Is there another team to be added to this trade? I don't think it's going to be Memphis for a variety of reasons, but obviously a team like Dallas has been rumored as a possible Jrue Holiday destination. That would clearly impact the Grizzlies to an extent. The Clippers have been mentioned since the Clippers were in on James Harden. Maybe being in on Jrue Holiday would make sense. So there's multiple layers to this deal impacting the Grizzlies, even without the Grizzlies being directly involved. Obviously, the Phoenix Suns getting a bit of a makeover coming out of the DeAndre Ayton era. That is a piece of the puzzle here as well.
Yeah, let's play the hindsight game a little bit. Let's play that nostalgic. Let's get into that a little bit, because I'm going to tell you what someone told me earlier when the trade was first announced. Someone told me and basically said, only if the Grizzlies had waited just a little bit longer.
Ooh.
Did you think about that yet, Joe?
I will admit that I did have that thought. I will admit that I thought, crap, there's Jrue Holiday.
Jrue Holiday could give you exactly what Marcus Smart gets you and then some. And only if the Grizzlies would have waited a little bit longer, could have potentially threw their name in there as the fourth team, and boom, it could have happened.
Yeah, I've maybe it's because I've fallen so hard in love with Marcus Smart, and I just remember.
Oh, for sure,
he's
a great
Celtics
fit.
Fans again, it just stands out in my mind, Damichael.
Yeah,
these guys they literally got 2 first-round picks and arguably the best player in the trade in Kristaps Porzingis. I don't even know if there's that much of an argument.
Yeah,
I'd say Porzingis, when healthy, is better than Marcus Smart and Tyus Jones. So the Celtics, in terms of value, won that trade, and they were bawling about losing this dude, Marcus Smart.
Yeah.
I think he's exactly what Memphis needs, and I wrote about that earlier in the week over at Bluff City Media. I'm not sure. Yeah, Jrue Holiday is basically a better version of that. I'm not disputing that, but I'm not going to have buyer's remorse because you had no way of knowing that Jrue Holiday. It was always Damian Lillard to Miami, right? That's what you heard
right.
The entire time. So how that would have worked money-wise with a third team, Milwaukee wasn't even in the realm of possibility, at least on the public eye, right? Now, maybe in NBA circles, people knew Milwaukee was in on it. But I obviously, it'd be nice to be able to say, oh, Jrue Holiday, let's go get him. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm comfortable with the Marcus Smart, especially because he's going to be cheaper than Jrue Holiday.
Yeah. I agree, and I agree with everything you just said. This is no slight to what Marcus Smart brings to the table.
Correct.
This is just pointing out the fact that sometimes in the NBA, if you just wait a little bit longer, teams get a little bit desperate, and you can just slide your way into boom. Here's Jrue Holiday for you. Like no one saw that coming. A lot of times
is better than Marcus Smart. That is a true statement.
Oh, for sure. And that's kind of like could you imagine if they would have just. You waited a little bit longer. You could have potentially had him, but then now let's get back into the future impact of this thing. I think to me there are a couple teams, one in the Eastern Conference that I think have the inside track into getting Jrue Holiday. Those teams are the Philadelphia 76ers, where we've seen reports they're interested in him, and another team that makes sense just from a standpoint of roster building is the Chicago Bulls. Ever since Lonzo Ball has went down, they have not had that point guard. And we saw how good they were when they had Lonzo. They were at the top of the Eastern Conference for that little stretch that they had him. So Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Vucevic, that core is probably running its course. Like this is probably the last chance for them to really do something. And adding Jrue Holiday. And honestly, you probably have to get off of the Lonzo contract, ship it to Portland, and throw some picks in there, because picks to Portland is probably what they're looking for at this point more than anything. And I think that could potentially put those teams in the door. But how does this affect the Grizzlies? Remember, you mentioned a couple teams. I'm going to say a couple teams in the Western Conference that I think make some sense. I haven't really dived into how the numbers could work really just yet. But one team – more than any, that makes some certain sense to me when it comes to Jrue Holiday is another reunion team. We talked about the Sixers being a potential reunion. How about the Pelicans? The Pelicans, can you imagine the perimeter defense? Jrue Holiday, Herb Jones, then you got Brandon Ingram, Zion, you got Valanciunas. You can potentially go small. And, I mean, I think that's a really nice fit. And, yes, I'm sure something would have to happen with C.J. McCollum in that case and how they would work that out. But I think he is an upgrade, in that perspective, and he really makes that team better. Another team that really caught my attention, and this was probably going to throw you off guard a little bit, is the Oklahoma City Thunder.
I was just about to say the Thunder.
Joe, at some point, they got to take that step. They got all these 22, 23-year-old guys who like to, go out and have a good time with each other and wear nice clothes together. At some point, you got to go get that dog. You got to go get that guy that's been there and done that, who can put that ring in your face and say, hey, all y'all want what I already have. Jrue Holiday can do that. He's got that in his hardware. I think, it makes sense. Now, how would it work? Obviously, Shai Gilgeous is a franchise guy there. Josh Giddey, they love him. Like, they'll have to figure out, how it'll work over there. You got Jalen Williams. Like, you got a lot of young talent. But Jrue Holiday puts them in a win now. Okay, let's try to take this jump from a top 10 team in the Western Conference to a top 4, top 5 seed. But those are the teams in the Western Conference that really strike my eye as someone, who could really affect the Grizzlies' positioning in the Western Conference.
I agree completely on the Thunder, except I think the Thunder are kind of like what the Grizzlies were in the early stages, like the first year where they ironically got knocked out by Damian Lillard in the bubble in that bubble play-in game. I think that the Thunder, it would be too early for them to do that. I'm not sure Jrue Holiday gets them over the hump. They're going to be the Thunder are going to be the sexy team. Somebody's going to have them as a top 5 seed in the Western Conference, but they're very young, as you mentioned.
Very young.
And I don't see them being ready for that. They might be a 7 or 8 seed play-in conversation. I don't think they're ready to make that leap, and I don't know that they're prepared to make that investment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I agree on Philly. The Pelicans make me nervous because I hadn't thought of the Pelicans, and that does make sense. I think as part of a 3-team trade with Philly and Los Angeles involving Harden, that to me makes the most sense. And Portland just getting more firsts coming their way out of that. If they could somehow find a way to get like Tyrese Maxey, I don't think Philly's going to part with him. But you understand, like that type, like that's who I would be kicking tires on, right? Oh, I've got this Jrue Holiday over here now, and just kind of flirt with what you can actually get out of that in terms of young prospects. I like I said, I could see a Harden to Clippers, Holiday to Philly, Portland helping manifest that and getting assets and young players out of it. And, that means a lot to the Grizzlies, right? If James Harden goes to the Clippers, in theory, that makes the Clippers better. If Holiday goes to the Clippers, right, that in theory makes the Clippers better. That's another team that the Grizzlies have to contend with in the Western Conference. Does Memphis have to respond, right? Does there need to be a Buddy Hield-esque kind of move to try to keep up with the Joneses in the Western Conference, assuming that Phoenix isn't the only team that's going to try to retool a little bit heading into training camp? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode. Just kidding. I have a co-host this time around. It's Damichael Cole, the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee. So glad that Damichael is back with me and back with us, back with you here on Locked On Grizzlies, your team each and every day, free and available wherever you get podcasts as well as on YouTube. We've been talking the Damian Lillard trade, what it means for the Grizzlies, what it means for the Milwaukee Bucks, obviously the Phoenix Suns and Portland Trailblazers involved as well. I had an episode recently talking about Buddy Hield and the Grizzlies going out and potentially going to make that acquisition, the value of having multiple three-point shooters, all those sorts of things, Damichael. And in the wake of this seismic NBA shift, obviously the major change is in Milwaukee. But with Phoenix getting better, with the LA Clippers potentially getting better, if they were to get Jrue Holiday or if Holiday goes to Philly in that Harden deal that I, theorized on a moment ago. Yeah. Does Memphis need to do anything? Is this something where you get, you mentioned earlier about Marcus Smart versus Jrue Holiday. We should have done something sooner with Jrue. Is this the time? Do we go get Buddy Hield? Do we try to find some more shooting? Do we help our half-court offense? Is there a way to get a backup big? Like, do they get antsy here, or do they look at their roster and say, we're good, we're going to go into camp regardless of what everyone else around us is doing? I think I know the answer, and I just want to kind of hear it from someone who's a little tuned in than I am.
Yeah, because this is a Zach Kleiman special right here. He says it often that Grizzlies aren't too concerned with what other teams do around there. We had this conversation with Zach Kleiman when Kevin Durant went to the Phoenix Suns, for example.
Right.
And moves like that, other moves in the Western Conference, notable moves in recent times. And it's always the same answer. It's the Grizzlies will focus on themselves. They're not trying to outpace these teams. It's not, really about that. It's about improving your roster to the best of your abilities, because that can be damaging. That can be really damaging. You're trying to keep up with other teams, and you have to consider a lot of angles. I know the Grizzlies, they dive into these dudes. And with Marcus Smart, with Derrick Rose, they really, really looked into what type of character these guys have, what they could bring to the Grizzlies all around before making the decision to go get these guys. So I don't think they're going to do anything just to do it. And this is something Zach Kleiman often says. And quite frankly, I think until we see what the Grizzlies have, they should definitely do that. Who knows? This lineup with Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, and whoever they put at the 3, whether it's Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, Luke Kennard, John Conchar, and with Steven Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr., that team might be dynamic. It might be really good. We don't know. For all we know, they could go 20-5 while John Morant is out, or they could go 10-15. Like, we don't know. But at the end of the day, the Grizzlies have a trade exception that they could use potentially in February. And if they need to reshuffle some things, there's going to be a lot of things that transpire in the league. Again, this goes back to my earlier point when we talked about Jrue Holiday. Only if the Grizzlies would have waited. Well, guess what? You don't do anything right now. You wait till closer to the trade deadline. Because you know what's going to happen by the trade deadline? Some teams that feel like they're going to be really good right now, I'm not going to say any names, Dallas Mavericks, but it's some other teams out there. I'm just joking. I know that's a rival, so I know everyone would like that one. But there are some teams out there that are planning to be really good. And once the season starts, they're not going to be good. And they're going to have to move off some guys. I mean, the Bulls, remember we're talking about Jrue Holiday potentially going there? What if they don't get Jrue Holiday? Well, guess what? They're going to be stuck again in that 6 to 8 to 9 to 10 range. And at some point, they're going to say, guess what? Man, DeMar DeRozan, he's in his 30s now. Like, where do you want to go, man? Like, let's facilitate something. And at the end of the day, the Grizzlies will be one of those teams with a trade exception with some movable assets. They'll be one of those teams that could get into that conversation. So, do they need to make a move? Not yet. Potentially, maybe eventually, they will be able to. They will need to make that move. But I'm preaching patience on this, Joe.
That's one of the biggest pains of, and maybe it's a silver lining in the dark cloud of the John Morant suspension. We're not going to have any idea what this Grizzlies team is until the middle of January to late January, right? It's going to be later than usual. I haven't mentioned this yet to Michael, but I'm usually Mr. Call Me at Christmas. I'm going to have to be like, call me at Martin Luther King Day this year or something like that. Like, it's not
call you at Valentine's Day.
Yeah, call me at Valentine's Day, because we're not going to be able to know at Christmas because Ja will have just come back. We're not going to know anything about what this team actually looks like. And I want to stress, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the Marcus Smart acquisition is not about the regular season. It's about the playoffs. Yep. And once you get Ja back in the fold and you get a month's worth of games of seeing what those guys look like together, then you can figure out, oh, crap, we do need a backup big. Xavier Tillman can't play anymore. Or, oh, man, Zaire Williams is not what we thought he was. We need a bigger wing. What's on the market? And you have the flexibility with that traded player exception, with all the different moldable contracts that you have. Maybe Brandon Clark has a setback in his rehab. Knock on wood. I don't want that to happen. But the ability for them to have that flexibility to adjust around the trade deadline is so important, because with Jaren Jackson Jr., with Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, this team, I think 10-15 is realistic for those first 25 games. I don't see them being much worse than that. That's probably the bottom of the expectation. And I have gone on record as saying to Michael, I don't know if you've heard this yet or not, once John Morant returns from December 19th on, I expect the Memphis Grizzlies to have the best record in the NBA. So as they get to that point and they're red hot around the trade deadline, maybe they say, let's go all in. Let's go and get the best guy on the market, and let's see what this team can do. You don't have that flexibility if you make a Buddy Hield trade now. So if anything, this might, be a bit of an upset in the minds of some. Yeah. I'm with you. This makes me want to make a trade less, because I am more interested in seeing what this team looks like at full strength with Ja, assuming that everybody stays healthy. And then you can reevaluate in early February what you need to do after you get that sample size of games that you need.
Yeah, that's it. That's all you have to do at this point, because like I said, for all we know, Marcus Smart could come out here and show us some, because he's going to be in a different situation. And I also said this as well on yesterday. Marcus Smart is a big part of the Grizzlies making this thing work, because you could realistically say this guy might go from being a ball handler 75% of the time while Ja's out to being like a spot-up shooter, secondary creator 75% of the time when Ja gets back. Like, his role is going to drastically shift, and he's going to have to adjust his game, both times. And some other players are going to have to adjust as well. But I think he's the primary guy. in this conversation. So, yeah, I think you're right. Late January, early February is maybe when we have a decent clue what the Grizzlies look like. And hopefully there aren't any sprained ankles or things like that, because then we're talking about March possibly when the team, could we could know what the Grizzlies really look like. But at the end of the day, I think you just play it safe right now, because the NBA season will be the NBA season. Certain things are going to happen that surprise us, and there are going to be some moves being made. We just saw Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant get traded last season after when Jacques Vaughn took over the Nets. That team looked like it was going to be a contender, right? Like we were all saying, man, wait till KD gets back to that team, and it never happened. It never happened. So I'm going to play the waiting game here. I think the Grizzlies right now, they don't need to make a move, but potentially we'll see, how the chips fall.
It's going to be fascinating to watch unfold. And I've said, I know this. You and I both, we kind of do the preview rounds on various podcasts and all those sorts of things. I think you were on the radio recently with some old friends of mine at Sports 56. I haven't been more excited to cover a season because I genuinely have no idea, right? Like this team, it's been predictable the last couple of years in terms of that upward trajectory. This team could be the best in the NBA once Ja's back. Would I be stunned if they were in the play-in? No, I wouldn't be stunned. Like that, this team has a lot of variance, and that makes for interesting watches and lots of storylines to talk about, which we will most certainly do here on Locked On Grizzlies. And speaking of storylines, Damichael, I know you'll be flying solo to finish us out on our Friday edition of the podcast. What are some stories that you're thinking of discussing to end the week for our wonderful viewers and listeners out there?
Yeah, it's a lot we got to talk about now. I mean, you mentioned it. Media Day is approaching on Monday. We'll say, me and you, I want us both to do a Media Day preview. We'll do that for Monday's episode there. But before that, we there are some other things around this Grizzlies team centered around these moves made around the league that we can talk about. I think it's time to have that conversation.
I can't wait to hear it, and I know you're going to do a great job closing us out, as you always do. Closing out the month of September. The next time you and I will be together, partner, will be our Monday edition of the show, and it's going to be October 2nd, I believe, if I'm right, if my dates are correct. Maybe,
it's about to get real spooky around here.
Ooh, I like that. Spooky stuff. All right, it's a scary season here on Locked On Grizzlies, and Damichael's going to do a great job on the Friday show, and then we'll have a Media Day preview for you on Monday, where Damichael and I both will be with you for that. So thank you so much for being with us for this episode of the show. Again, anywhere you listen to podcasts, YouTube, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. We had an extremely strong end to last playoff run and early offseason. Obviously, things get slower in the dog days of the NBA offseason. Damichael and I are excited to kick off our second full season together in full effect. Hopefully, you'll stick with us. Hopefully, you'll tell friends. You got to check out Locked On Grizzlies. Make it part of your NBA content consumption experience. Damichael will take care of you guys on our Friday episode. We'll have a Media Day and preseason preview edition on Monday. Until then, stay locked in. Have a great rest of your day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. Proud members of Locked On Podcast Network. Stay locked